When the flashing red and blue lights appeared outside her window, Elena Blake knew they weren't there to protect her. They were there to drive her out. After decades in this house, she had become a target for Officer Harlan Crow, who viewed her simply as an obstacle to his vision of a newly gentrified district. He assumed that a lonely, elderly black woman would be an easy target for his intimidation tactics. He was entirely unaware that her son held a position of command within the United States Navy. The morning sun over Charleston, South Carolina, was already thick with humidity when Elena Blake, a retired pediatric nurse, knelt in the dirt of her front yard, carefully pruning her prized hydrangeas. For decades, the modest craftsman home on Sycamore Drive had been her sanctuary. She and her late husband had bought it back when the neighborhood was filled with working-class families. Now the streets were lined with luxury SUVs, artisanal coffee shops, and towering modern condos that cast long shadows over the older single-story homes. Elena wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her gardening glove, humming a quiet hymn. She was a fixture in the community, the kind of neighbor who baked casseroles for new arrivals and kept a watchful eye on the local children playing in the street. But recently, the air in the neighborhood had changed. A real estate development firm had been aggressively buying up properties, bulldozing history to make way for sleek new townhouses. Elena had received dozens of aggressive cash offers in the mail, all of which went straight into her paper shredder. She wasn't selling. This house held the echoes of her husband's laughter and the height marks of her only son carved into the kitchen doorframe. The heavy crunch of tires on gravel interrupted her peaceful morning. A patrol car rolled to a slow, deliberate stop right in front of her driveway, partially blocking the sidewalk. The engine idled loudly. The door swung open and out stepped Officer Harlan Crow. He was a man with a tight buzz cut, aviator sunglasses, and a posture that radiated unearned authority. He had a reputation in the local precinct, one that the black residents of Charleston whispered about in barbershops and church pews. Crow was known for being unnecessarily harsh, for escalating minor traffic stops into traumatic ordeals, and for acting as a personal enforcer for the city's wealthier, whiter elite. He slammed the car door and adjusted his heavy utility belt, his boots crunching loudly on Elena's walkway. He didn't take off his sunglasses as he approached her. "Morning, officer," Elena said politely, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She slowly stood up, brushing the soil from the knees of her denim overalls. "Can I help you with something?" Crow stopped a few feet away, hooking his thumbs into his belt. He looked her up and down, his lips pressed into a thin, disdainful line. "Are you the occupant of this residence?" he asked, his voice dripping with forced bureaucratic coldness. "I'm the owner," Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. "Elena Blake, is there a problem?" "We've been getting complaints," Crow said, pulling a small notepad from his chest pocket. He didn't open it. He just tapped it against his palm. "Noise complaints, blight complaints, neighbors saying this property is bringing down the value of the street." Elena frowned, looking around her immaculately kept yard. The grass was freshly mowed, the flower beds were vibrant, and the porch was swept clean. "Blight, officer? I've lived here for decades. My home is well maintained. Who exactly is complaining?" Crow stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of stale coffee and harsh aftershave washed over her. "That's not your concern, ma'am. What is your concern is the fact that you're in violation of several new city ordinances." He let out a low, mocking chuckle. "Look around. You don't fit the demographic of this neighborhood anymore. The development firm offered you a more than fair price for this teardown. You should have taken it." Elena's heart pounded, but her spine stiffened. "My property is not for sale, and last I checked, declining a real estate offer isn't a police matter. Are you acting as a police officer right now or a real estate agent for the development firm?" Crow's jaw clenched. His face flushed a dull red. The polite facade vanished instantly. He leaned down, pointing a thick, calloused finger inches from Elena's face. "Listen to me very carefully. You people always think you can play the victim. I have an eviction notice coming down the pipeline for this address, based on structural hazards and unpaid municipal zoning fines. You have two choices. You pack up your junk and leave quietly by the end of the week, or I come back here, drag you out in handcuffs, and let the bulldozers do the rest." "You can't do that," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts. "My taxes are paid. My deed is clear. You have no legal right." "I am the law out here," Crow barked, cutting her off. "I don't need a debate from you. Friday morning you are gone or you are going to jail for criminal trespassing on condemned property. Have a nice day." He turned on his heel, stormed back to his cruiser, and sped off, leaving black tire marks on the asphalt. Elena stood alone in her garden, her hands trembling violently. She looked at her beautiful home, the sanctuary she had built, suddenly feeling entirely exposed and terrified. The psychological warfare waged by Officer Crow didn't stop with that morning visit. The next evening, as Elena was washing dishes, the flashing lights of a patrol car illuminated her kitchen window. She peeked through the blinds to see Crow's cruiser parked across the street. He didn't get out. He just sat there for hours, the headlights shining directly into her living room, sending a clear, silent message of intimidation. The following day, Elena took an Uber to the local municipal courthouse to check her property records and zoning status. She spoke to a weary clerk behind a plexiglass window. "Excuse me, I need to check if there are any municipal fines or structural condemnation notices on my property," Elena said, sliding her ID under the slot. 412 Sycamore Drive. The clerk typed away at her keyboard for a moment, her brow furrowing. "That's strange. Your file is locked. It says there's a pending transfer of deed to the development firm under a Municipal Emergency Acquisition Act." Elena's blood ran cold. "What? That's impossible. I never signed anything. My mortgage was paid off years ago." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't access the details," the clerk said, looking nervously over her shoulder. "The hold was placed by the local precinct. You'd have to speak to the liaison officer handling the district." "And who is that?" Elena demanded. "Officer Harlan Crow." Elena stumbled out of the courthouse, the suffocating southern heat making her dizzy. The realization crashed down on her. Crow wasn't just a racist cop acting on his own prejudices. He was part of a coordinated, corrupt machine. The development firm was using the police force to illegally seize properties they couldn't buy. They were falsifying structural hazard reports and using police intimidation to force elderly, vulnerable residents to abandon their homes. And because she was an older black woman living alone, they figured she didn't have the resources or the legal backing to fight them. The next morning brought the final blow. Elena was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea she could barely taste, when a loud, violent pounding shook her front door. "Open up, Charleston PD!" Elena rushed to the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. Officer Crow stood on the porch, accompanied by two other officers who looked barely out of the academy. Crow held a manila folder in his hand. He slapped an orange sticker onto Elena's freshly painted front door. The sticker read, "Condemned, unfit for human habitation." "What are you doing?" Elena cried out, trying to peel the sticker off. Crow grabbed her wrist hard. His grip was bruising. "I told you, Elena. The city inspectors came by yesterday. They found severe foundational damage. This house is a collapse risk." "No one came by here. You're lying," Elena shouted, pulling her arm free. Tears of frustration and fear stung her eyes. "You're stealing my home!" "I'm keeping the neighborhood safe," Crow sneered, stepping inside the doorway, physically backing Elena into her own hallway. "Here's the official notice. You have until tomorrow morning. At that time, my men and I will breach this door. If you are inside, you will be arrested for violating a municipal safety order, resisting arrest, and whatever else I feel like writing on the report. Are we clear?" Elena looked at the two young officers behind Crow. They looked away, shifting uncomfortably, complicit in their silence. "Get out of my house," Elena whispered, her voice tight with grief. "See you tomorrow, Elena. Pack light." Crow smirked, turning and leading his men away. When the door closed, Elena finally broke down. She sank to the hardwood floor, sobbing into her hands. The system she had paid taxes to, the community she had nurtured, was turning a blind eye while she was being legally robbed. She had tried calling the local news, but they dismissed her as just another disgruntled homeowner caught up in gentrification. She had tried legal aid, but they said it would take time to get an injunction, and she only had hours. She looked up at the mantel. Sitting next to a photo of her late husband was a framed photograph of a tall, broad-shouldered man in a pristine white Navy uniform, covered in medals, holding a sword. Elena hadn't wanted to bother him. He was a busy man, a man with the weight of global security on his shoulders. He was currently stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, dealing with naval deployments and international strategy. But she had no one else. With trembling hands, she picked up her cell phone and dialed a private encrypted number. It rang twice. "Mom." The voice was deep, resonant, and instantly comforting. "Everett," Elena choked out, the tears flowing freely now. "Everett, I need you. They're taking the house. They're coming to arrest me tomorrow." On the other end of the line, Vice Admiral Everett Lang went completely silent. Inside the command center of the United States Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia, Vice Admiral Everett Lang stood by a massive digital map of the Atlantic Ocean. He was an imposing figure with a muscular build honed by decades of discipline. His presence commanded immediate respect. He was a man of intense focus, sharp intellect, and unwavering integrity. He had commanded destroyers in the Pacific, overseen special operations in the Middle East, and survived the ruthless politics of the Pentagon. When his personal cell phone rang with his mother's distinct ringtone, he held up a hand, silencing the briefing room filled with high-ranking officers and intelligence analysts. He stepped out into the quiet fluorescent-lit hallway. "Mom," he said, expecting to hear about her garden or asking when he'd come down for some of her famous peach cobbler. When he heard her voice, cracked, terrified, and sobbing, the blood in his veins turned to ice. Everett listened quietly as Elena poured out the nightmare of the last few days. She told him about Officer Harlan Crow, the orange sticker on the door, the locked municipal files, and the threat of arrest the following morning. Everett didn't interrupt. His jaw tightened until the muscles ached. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. He had spent his life defending his country, defending the rights of citizens from foreign threats. To hear that a corrupt, racist local cop was terrorizing his elderly mother for a real estate payday ignited a quiet, terrifying rage deep within his chest. "Mom, listen to me," Everett said, his voice calm, steady, and dropping an octave, the Admiral's voice. "Do not pack a single box. Do not leave that house. Lock the doors, make yourself a cup of tea, and go to sleep tonight knowing you are perfectly safe." "Everett, he said he's going to break the door down. He has a badge." "I don't care what he has on his chest," Everett replied coldly. "I'll be there by morning. Nobody is touching you, and nobody is touching that house, I promise you." "Okay," Elena breathed, drawing strength from her son's unwavering certainty. "Okay, Everett. I love you. I love you too, Mom." Everett hung up the phone. He didn't walk back into the briefing room immediately. Instead, he made a call to an old friend who ran naval intelligence in the sector, but more importantly, had deep ties with federal investigators in the South Carolina region. "I need a favor," Everett said. "I need everything you can find on a Charleston PD officer named Harlan Crow and a real estate shell company tied to the development firm. Financials, offshore accounts, quiet payouts, everything." It didn't take long. Within the hour, Everett was sitting at his desk, staring at a decrypted dossier on his secure laptop. The picture painted was disgusting, but painfully common. The development firm was owned by a ruthless local developer named Arthur Thorne. Thorne had been secretly funneling money into the police union benevolent fund, which was essentially a slush fund managed by Officer Crow and his precinct captain. In exchange, Crow acted as Thorne's attack dog, using civil asset forfeiture laws, fake code violations, and outright intimidation to drive minority homeowners out of valuable properties. They had done it to other families recently. Everett closed the laptop. The legal system was supposed to handle this, but the local legal system was complicit. He needed to make a statement. He needed to ensure this man never put on a badge again, and he needed to do it in a way that Crow would never, ever forget. Everett stood up and walked to his closet. He bypassed his working uniform and reached for his service dress whites. He pinned his ribbons to his chest: the Navy Cross, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star. The medals clinked softly in the quiet room. He booked a red-eye private military transport flight to Joint Base Charleston. By morning, the air on Sycamore Drive was already thick and humid. Elena sat in her living room, her Bible open on her lap, watching the clock tick, when a heavy tactical police van rolled down the street, followed closely by Officer Crow's black and white cruiser. The vehicles hopped the curb, parking directly on Elena's manicured front lawn and crushing her hydrangeas. Officer Crow stepped out holding a breaching ram. He was accompanied by 4 other officers, all wearing tactical vests. Behind the police vehicles, a black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. Arthur Thorne, the developer, stepped out wearing a tailored suit, sipping an iced coffee. He had come to watch his newly acquired property be vacated. Crow swaggered up to the front porch, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, commencing forced entry at 412 Sycamore for a condemned property eviction." He raised his fist and pounded on the door. "Elena, time's up. Open the door or we knock it down." Inside, Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Before Crow could signal his men to use the battering ram, a low, powerful rumble vibrated through the neighborhood. It wasn't a police car. Turning the corner onto Sycamore Drive was a convoy. 2 black armored government Suburbans with heavily tinted windows and federal plates moved in perfect synchronized precision. They didn't stop at the curb. They pulled directly into the driveway, boxing in the police van and Crow's cruiser. Crow lowered the battering ram, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. He put his hand on his holstered sidearm and marched toward the Suburbans. "Hey, you can't park here. This is an active police scene." The doors of the Suburbans opened simultaneously. Out stepped several men in crisp dark suits, NCIS agents, alongside FBI agents wearing tactical windbreakers. They didn't say a word. They simply fanned out, creating a perimeter around Elena's property. Then the rear door of the lead Suburban opened. Vice Admiral Everett Lang stepped out. The morning sun caught the brilliant white of his uniform and the heavy gold braid on his shoulder boards. The rows of medals on his chest gleamed. He looked like a towering monument of federal authority. His face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. He didn't look at the junior officers. He didn't look at Arthur Thorne. His eyes locked directly onto Officer Harlan Crow. Everett walked up the driveway, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the concrete. The federal agents parted flawlessly to let him through. Crow took a step back, his arrogance faltering as the sheer presence of the Admiral bore down on him. Who are you?" Crow stammered, his hand instinctively dropping away from his weapon. "This is city business, pal." Everett stopped a few feet from Crow. He looked down at the orange condemnation sticker on his mother's door, then back to the corrupt cop. "My name is Vice Admiral Everett Lang, Commander of the United States Fleet Forces," Everett said, his voice quiet yet carrying the devastating weight of a thunderclap. "And you are standing on my mother's porch." The silence that fell over Sycamore Drive was absolute. The morning chorus of cicadas and the distant hum of city traffic seemed to vanish, sucked into the vacuum of Vice Admiral Everett Lang's commanding presence. Officer Harlan Crow stood frozen on the porch, the heavy steel breaching ram dangling uselessly from his right hand. The arrogant sneer that had defined his face for the past few days melted away, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression of sudden, paralyzing comprehension. He blinked, his eyes darting from the gleaming gold oak leaves on Everett's visor to the austere, unsmiling faces of the federal agents flanking the driveway. Your mother," Crow stammered, the words catching in his throat. He looked at the orange condemnation sticker, then back at the towering military officer. The math was finally computing in his brain, and the answer was devastating. "Let me be absolutely clear, Officer Crow," Everett said, his voice dropping into a register that had silenced war rooms and broken seasoned combat veterans. He didn't yell. The terrifying thing about the Admiral was his absolute icy control. If you so much as twitch toward that sidearm, or if you take one more step toward that door, you will spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary. Drop the ram. For a split second, Crow's pride flared. His knuckles whitened around the handle of the ram. He was the king of this district. He was the law. He looked over his shoulder at his junior officers, silently begging them for backup. The 4 tactical officers took a collective synchronized step backward. They lowered their hands, distancing themselves from Crow as fast as humanly possible. They wanted no part of this. The heavy steel ram slipped from Crow's sweaty grip and hit the wooden porch with a loud, hollow thud. "This is a municipal matter," Crow tried to say, though his voice cracked humiliatingly. He puffed out his chest, a desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling authority. "I have a legal city ordinance. A judge signed off on this condemnation. This house is a structural hazard, and I am executing a lawful eviction. The military has no jurisdiction here." "You're right about one thing," a new voice called out. From the 2nd Armored Suburban, a tall man in a dark gray suit walked forward. He flashed a leather wallet containing a golden badge. "The military doesn't have jurisdiction over local evictions, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation has jurisdiction over Title 18, United States Code, Section 241, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and wire fraud." The man stepped up beside Everett. "Special Agent Preston Hale, FBI Public Corruption Task Force, and you, Officer Crow, are way out of your depth." "Certa." Down by the curb, Arthur Thorne, the developer, suddenly lost his appetite for the spectacle. The smug satisfaction he had been wearing just moments ago evaporated. He dropped his iced coffee onto the grass, the plastic cup splitting open and spilling brown liquid over Elena's ruined hydrangeas. Thorne turned on his heel, pulling his keys from his tailored pocket, and made a fast, panicky walk toward his luxury SUV. "Stop right there, Mr. Thorne," Agent Hale barked, not even turning his head. 2 NCIS agents smoothly intercepted the real estate mogul. One of them placed a heavy hand squarely in the center of Thorne's chest, pushing him back against the side of his vehicle. "Hey, get your hands off me," Thorne shouted, his voice shrill. "Do you know who I am? I own half the commercial real estate in Charleston. I know the mayor. I'll have your badges for this." "You're going to need a much better lawyer than the mayor's golfing buddies, Arthur," Everett said, finally turning his gaze toward the developer. "Because you didn't just steal houses from elderly citizens. You got sloppy with where you hid the money." Crow, still trapped on the porch, wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. "This is a misunderstanding. Thorne runs a legitimate development firm. The city inspectors condemned this property yesterday. It's unsafe. I'm just doing my job." "Is that right?" Everett reached into the inside pocket of his service dress coat and pulled out a folded sheaf of documents. He snapped the papers open with a sharp flick of his wrist. "Because I had naval intelligence pull the city's inspection logs in the early morning hours. The city inspector assigned to this district has been on vacation for the last several days. He hasn't set foot in Charleston, let alone on my mother's property." Crow's face drained of all remaining color. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. "Furthermore," Everett continued, stepping onto the first stair of the porch, closing the distance between them, "the structural hazard report filed to secure your fraudulent eviction warrant was timestamped the previous afternoon. It was submitted from an IP address registered to the precinct captain's private office, an office that you, Officer Crow, were logged into. You fabricated a municipal safety hazard to terrorize my mother." I was just following orders from up the chain," Crow stammered, throwing his superiors under the bus the second the pressure became unbearable. "Thorne made deals with the captain. I'm just a patrol officer. I do what I'm told." Behind the locked front door, Elena Blake listened to the exchange. Her hands, which had been trembling for days, finally steadied. The oppressive, suffocating terror that had lived in her chest evaporated. She unbolted the deadbolt. With a loud click, the lock disengaged and the front door swung open. Elena stood in the doorway wearing her Sunday church dress, her chin held high. She looked past the trembling, defeated form of Officer Crow and locked eyes with her son. Everett's cold, furious demeanor softened for a fraction of a second. "Morning, Mom. Sorry I'm late." "You're right on time, Everett," Elena said, her voice clear and strong. She turned her gaze to Crow, who couldn't even meet her eyes. "I told you I wasn't leaving, Officer Crow." The neighborhood had begun to wake up. Doors along Sycamore Drive cracked open. Neighbors, many of whom had been intimidated by Crow in the past, stepped out onto their porches or walked down to the ends of their driveways. They watched in stunned silence as the untouchable tyrant of their district was systematically dismantled on Elena Blake's front lawn. "Agent Hale," Everett said, not taking his eyes off Crow. "Take out the trash." "With pleasure, Admiral," Hale replied. He walked up the steps, unhooking a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Harlan Crow, you are under arrest for federal civil rights violations, extortion, and fraud under color of law. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Crow's shoulders slumped. The fight was completely gone from him. He turned around, placing his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs echoing across the porch was the sweetest sound Elena had heard in years. "My badge," Crow mumbled pathetically, as Hale patted him down and confiscated his service weapon. "You can't just take my badge. You disgraced that badge the second you used it to terrorize an innocent woman," Everett said coldly. "You're done." As Hale led the handcuffed officer down the driveway, the true scope of the federal trap was revealed down by the curb. Arthur Thorne was screaming into his cell phone, demanding his high-priced defense attorney. But an NCIS agent casually reached out and plucked the phone from his hand, terminating the call. "Mr. Thorne," a senior NCIS agent said, pulling out a separate warrant. "Arthur Thorne, you are under federal arrest." "On what grounds?" Thorne shrieked, his polished veneer completely shattered. "You can't arrest an American citizen for a local real estate dispute. This is illegal." "You're absolutely right, Arthur. We can't," Everett called out from the porch, walking down to join the agents on the grass. "If this were just about you bribing corrupt cops to steal local real estate, I would have just let the FBI handle it. But you got greedy." Thorne froze, his eyes darting nervously. Everett stopped a few feet from the billionaire developer. When Naval Intelligence started digging into the development firm's shell companies last night, they didn't just find the bribe money you funneled to the local police union. They tracked where your excess capital was going. You see, Arthur, buying stolen properties at a fraction of their worth generates a lot of dirty cash. And you decided to wash that cash through a holding company in the Cayman Islands. Thorne's jaw tightened. The panic in his eyes turned into genuine terror. "The problem for you," Everett continued, his voice echoing in the quiet street, "is that the specific offshore account you use to launder your real estate money is managed by a brokerage firm heavily tied to a sanctioned foreign shipping conglomerate, a conglomerate currently under naval embargo for attempting to smuggle weapons components. By funneling your money through that specific account, you bypassed international trade sanctions and provided financial liquidity to a hostile foreign entity. The color completely drained from Thorne's face. He stumbled backward against his SUV, his knees visibly buckling. "That," Everett said, leaning in close, "makes this a matter of national security. That gives the Department of the Navy, and by extension me, complete jurisdiction to rip your life apart piece by piece." I didn't know," Thorne whispered, his voice trembling. "My accountants handled the offshore transfers. I didn't know who they were tied to, I swear." "Tell it to the federal judge," Everett said flatly. He nodded to the NCIS agents. "Get him out of my sight." Thorne was roughly spun around, his hands wrenched behind his back and secured in cuffs. As he was shoved into the back of the second armored Suburban, he looked back at Elena's house, the realization settling in that picking on one elderly black woman had just cost him his empire, his fortune, and his freedom. The 4 tactical officers who had arrived with Crow were still standing by their van, looking like scolded children. Agent Hale walked over to them, pointing a stern finger. "You 4, Hale barked. "You get back to your precinct. You tell your captain that the FBI is currently raiding his office, seizing his hard drives, and freezing his pension. Tell him not to leave the building. We'll be there shortly to collect him." The officers didn't say a word. They scrambled into their tactical van, threw it in reverse, and sped away from Sycamore Drive as fast as the engine would carry them, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of Crow's arrest. With the street cleared of the immediate threat, the flashing red and blue lights of Crow's abandoned cruiser cast long, rhythmic shadows over the lawn. The neighborhood residents, who had been watching in awe, began to step forward. A slow, steady round of applause rippled down the street. It started with Elena's next-door neighbor, an older gentleman named Henry, and soon the whole block was clapping. It was the sound of a community exhaling after years of holding its breath. Everett turned his back on the arrested men and walked up the steps to his mother. The severe, intimidating mask of the Vice Admiral melted away entirely. He took off his white uniform cover, tucked it under his arm, and wrapped Elena in a massive, crushing hug. Elena buried her face in his broad shoulder, the heavy metals pressing against her cheek. The tears she shed now weren't from fear or helplessness. They were tears of profound relief and overwhelming pride. "You did good, Mom," Everett whispered into her hair. "You held the line." "I knew you'd come," Elena said, her voice muffled against his coat. "I told him he was messing with the wrong family." Everett pulled back slightly, looking at her with a gentle smile. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" "Just my pride for a little while," Elena admitted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked past Everett down at the crushed hydrangeas where the police van had parked. "And my flowers, but flowers grow back." "I'll buy you a whole greenhouse," Everett laughed, the sound warm and rich. "I don't need a greenhouse," Elena said, stepping back and smoothing the front of her dress. She looked at her home, the little craftsman that had weathered storms, time, and now the greed of corrupt men. "I just need my home, and maybe a cup of that tea I promised you." "Lead the way," Everett said, offering her his arm. As they walked into the house, leaving the federal agents to secure the crime scene and impound the abandoned police cruiser, Elena knew the fight wasn't entirely over. There would be trials, news cameras, and depositions, but as she sat at her kitchen table pouring a cup of Earl Grey for the commander of the United States Fleet Forces, she knew one thing for certain: no one would ever try to take her home again. The tea kettle whistled sharply in the kitchen of the house on Sycamore Drive, a piercing, normal sound that anchored Elena back to reality. The flashing police lights had finally vanished from her front window, replaced by the steady, comforting presence of an unmarked federal vehicle parked on the curb. Elena poured the steaming water into 2 porcelain cups. Her hands were completely steady for the first time in days. She set a cup down in front of her son. Vice Admiral Everett Lang had removed his heavy, metal-laden coat and draped it over the back of a wooden dining chair. Even in his crisp white shirt and shoulder boards, sitting at the small familiar kitchen table, he looked like the boy she had raised, just with the weight of the world resting on his broad shoulders. "Drink your tea, Everett," Elena said softly, taking a seat across from him. "You've been flying all night." Everett took a slow sip, letting the warmth wash over him. "It's good to be home, Mom, even under these circumstances." Before they could settle into the quiet peace of the morning, Everett's encrypted cell phone buzzed against the wooden tabletop. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the number of Special Agent Preston Hale. He answered it on speaker. "Admiral," Hale's voice crackled through the speaker, crisp and strictly business. "We are currently executing the search warrant at the local precinct. You were right on the money. Captain Silas Grant was actively feeding documents into a heavy-duty shredder when my team breached his office door. We have him in custody." Everett's eyes hardened. "Did you secure the hard drives?" "Yes, sir. And it's worse than we thought," Hale continued. "Grant kept a shadow ledger. He's been taking kickbacks from the development firm for years. They didn't just target Sycamore Drive. We found records of numerous families across the city who were illegally evicted under falsified structural condemnations and bogus drug raid warrants. Every single one of those properties was flipped to Arthur Thorne's shell companies within weeks." Elena gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Numerous families. Good Lord. All those people thrown out on the street." "Not anymore, Mom," Everett promised quietly. He leaned closer to the phone. "Agent Hale, What's the status of Mayor Quentin Hale? The mayor is currently in full damage control mode, Hale replied, a hint of disgust in his voice. He just announced an emergency press conference for this afternoon. He's going to try and spin this. Word on the wire is that the mayor is planning to call this a rogue operation by a few bad apples in the police department. He wants to distance City Hall from Thorne and the precinct captain to save his upcoming re-election campaign. Does he know about the federal money laundering charges tied to the sanctioned foreign conglomerate? Everett asked. Not yet, Hale said. We've kept that tightly under wraps. As far as the mayor knows, this is just a local corruption bust. Let him speak, Everett said, a cold, strategic glint appearing in his eyes. Let the mayor dig his own grave on live television. When he finishes lying to the public, the Department of Justice will drop the hammer. Keep me posted, Agent Hale. Everett ended the call. He looked at his mother, seeing the profound sadness in her eyes for the other families who hadn't had a Navy admiral to call when the police came knocking. Everett, Elena said, her voice resolute. You have to help those other families. They didn't have anyone to protect them. They lost everything. I know, Mom. And I will, Everett said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. The FBI has the evidence now. The DOJ is going to tear the development firm apart. But I need you to be strong. The media is going to descend on this neighborhood this afternoon. You are the one who broke this wide open. They're going to want to hear from you. Elena looked around her kitchen at the faded floral wallpaper, the height marks on the doorframe, the quiet, simple life she had fought so hard to keep. She took a deep breath, drawing on a reservoir of strength she didn't know she had left. Let them come. I've got nothing to hide, and I've got plenty to say. By afternoon, Sycamore Drive was entirely unrecognizable. A fleet of satellite news trucks had descended upon the neighborhood. Reporters with microphones stood on the sidewalks, broadcasting live feeds across the nation. The story had exploded. Corrupt cops arrested by FBI on elderly woman's lawn. Down at City Hall, Mayor Quentin Hale was sweating under the bright studio lights of the press briefing room. He adjusted his expensive red silk tie, gripping the podium with nervous energy. The city of Charleston is deeply shocked and appalled by the isolated actions of Officer Harlan Crow and Captain Silas Grant. The mayor lied smoothly into the cameras. We have zero tolerance for corruption in our police force. These rogue individuals acted completely on their own, betraying the badge and the public trust. However, I want to assure the business community that Charleston remains open for legitimate development. The development firm is an independent entity, and we will let the courts decide. The heavy oak doors at the back of the briefing room swung open with a loud, resounding crash. The cameras instantly swiveled. The murmurs of the press corps died down into stunned silence. Walking down the center aisle of the briefing room was Special Agent Preston Hale, flanked by two heavily armed federal marshals, but it was the man walking beside Hale who commanded the room's absolute attention. Vice Admiral Everett Lang in his immaculate service dress, whites moved with terrifying, inevitable purpose. Mayor Hale's face turned the color of ash. Excuse me, we're in the middle of a press briefing. The briefing is over, Quentin, Hale said, stepping up to the side of the podium and flashing his federal badge to the cameras. As of minutes ago, the United States Department of Justice, in conjunction with Naval Criminal Investigative Service, has frozen all municipal accounts tied to the development firm and the Charleston Police Department. The reporters erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions and flashing bulbs. Everett stepped up to the microphones. He looked directly into the primary broadcast camera, his expression completely unyielding. Mayor Hale just told you this was the work of a few bad apples, Everett said, his voice echoing powerfully through the room, cutting through the chaos. That is a lie. This was a systemic, localized criminal enterprise designed to prey on vulnerable elderly citizens. Officer Harlan Crow and Captain Grant were the muscle. Arthur Thorne was the bank, and Mayor Hale's office provided the municipal zoning cover to make it happen. Hale stepped back from the podium, raising his hands defensively. This is slander. You have absolutely no proof of my involvement. We have Arthur Thorne's offshore financial ledgers, Everett countered smoothly. ledgers that show direct, untraceable campaign contributions routed from the Cayman Islands straight into your re-election PAC. Money that Arthur Thorne illegally generated by stealing homes from numerous innocent families. The room went dead silent. The mayor's knees visibly buckled. He looked desperately at the doors, but the federal marshals had already blocked the exits. Furthermore, Everett continued, turning his gaze back to the press, because Thorne chose to launder his real estate blood money through a foreign entity, currently under United States naval sanctions. This is no longer just a white-collar corruption case. It is a matter of federal national security. Anyone who facilitated this operation will face federal conspiracy charges. Everett stepped back, making room for Agent Hale. Hale pulled a folded warrant from his suit jacket. He looked at the trembling mayor. "Quentin Hale, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Put your hands behind your back." Live on national television, the mayor of Charleston was handcuffed and led out of his own briefing room. The system that had terrorized Elena Blake was completely, spectacularly dismantled in a matter of hours. Back on Sycamore Drive, Elena sat in her living room watching the broadcast on her television. Her neighbor Henry was sitting on the couch beside her, wiping a tear from his eye. "They got him, Elena," Henry whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "They actually got him!" Elena looked at the screen, watching her son walk out of the press room with the quiet dignity of a man who had done his duty. She smiled, a profound sense of peace finally settling into her bones. "Yes, Henry, they got them. Now we get our neighborhood back." In the weeks that followed, the heavy oak doors of the United States District Court in downtown Charleston swung open, letting a stream of reporters and local citizens spill out onto the marble steps. The air was crisp with the chill of late autumn, but the mood in the crowd was electric with warmth and vindication. Inside the courtroom, the hammer of justice had finally fallen. Officer Harlan Crow, stripped of his badge, his authority, and his arrogant sneer, had sat at the defense table in a bright orange jumpsuit. When the federal judge handed down a lengthy prison sentence with no possibility of early parole, Crow had openly wept. The tough, untouchable cop who loved to terrorize older women had completely shattered when faced with the cold, hard reality of federal time. Captain Silas Grant received an even longer sentence for orchestrating the scheme, but the heaviest blow fell on Arthur Thorne. Because of the naval sanctions tied to his offshore money laundering, the Department of Justice brought the full weight of federal law against him. Thorne was sentenced to decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary. His empire was dissolved. The development firm was entirely liquidated, and every single cent of his seized assets was placed into a restitution fund. Elena Blake walked down the courthouse steps, her arm linked securely with her son, Vice Admiral Everett Lang. Everett was out of uniform that day, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, blending in as a supportive son rather than a military commander. As they reached the bottom of the steps, a group of people was waiting for them. It was the families who had been illegally evicted by Thorne and Crow. An older man leaning heavily on a wooden cane stepped forward. His name was Samuel, and his historic home had been stolen from him years prior under the guise of a fake narcotics warrant. "Elena," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, taking her hands in his trembling ones. "The lawyers just told us, because of the federal asset seizure, all the fraudulent deeds have been voided. Thorne's money is paying to repair the damages. We get our homes back, Elena. All of us." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She squeezed Samuel's hands. "That's right, Samuel. We're all going home." The crowd of families erupted into tears, hugging each other, crying tears of relief. It was a victory that went beyond just one house on Sycamore Drive. It was the reclamation of a community's soul. A few weeks later, Sycamore Drive looked entirely different than it had on that terrifying morning. The massive, towering luxury condos that the development firm had managed to build were now tied up in federal litigation. But the older historic homes were alive with activity. The city, under the administration of an interim mayor, eager to clean up the city's image, had officially designated the 4-block radius as a protected historical cultural zone. No developer would ever be able to touch it again, without going through a mountain of federal and state oversight. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the street was blocked off to traffic. The neighborhood was throwing a massive block party to celebrate the return of the evicted families. Barbecue smoke drifted through the air, mixing with the sounds of Motown classics playing from a portable speaker. Children were drawing with chalk on the sidewalks, and the older folks were sitting in lawn chairs, sipping sweet tea and sharing stories. Elena was in her front yard wearing her denim overalls, carefully tending to a brand new row of hydrangea bushes. The federal agents had accidentally crushed her old ones during the raid, but Everett had kept his promise. He had hired a local landscaping company to plant the most beautiful, vibrant blue and purple hydrangeas the state had ever seen. "They look good, Mom," a deep voice said from the porch. Elena stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and smiled. Everett walked down the steps. He was in his Navy working uniform, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He was flying back to Norfolk in an hour. Duty was calling him back to the fleet. "They'll look even better by spring," Elena said, walking over to him. She looked up at her towering son, her heart swelling with an emotion too large for words. "You have to go." "I do," Everett said softly, setting his bag down. "The world doesn't stop turning, but I wanted to make sure you were secure before I shipped out." "I am, Everett. Because of you." Everett shook his head, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No, Mom. Because of you. You were the one who refused to back down when that badge showed up at your door. You were the one who held the line. I just brought the cavalry." Elena chuckled, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. "Well, it's a mighty fine cavalry." "I love you, Mom," Everett whispered, kissing the top of her head. "I'll call you when I land in Virginia. Keep the doors locked, but don't worry about anyone knocking." "I won't," Elena promised. "I love you too. Be safe out there on the water." Everett picked up his duffel bag, gave her one last salute, a genuine, respectful gesture to the strongest woman he knew, and climbed into the waiting black government Suburban. Elena stood on her porch, watching the vehicle drive down the street, waving as it disappeared around the corner. She didn't feel the creeping anxiety that had plagued her just months ago. She felt rooted, grounded. She turned and looked at her house. The orange condemnation sticker was long gone, replaced by a polished brass plaque next to the doorframe that read, "The Blake Residence, established decades ago." The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. The laughter of the block party echoed down the street. Elena took a deep breath of the evening air, the scent of barbecue and blooming flowers filling her lungs. She walked back to her garden, picked up her watering can, and got back to work. This was her home, and absolutely nothing in the world was going to take it away. If Elena's incredible courage and Vice Admiral Everett Lang's epic delivery of federal justice made you cheer, you don't want to miss our next story. We bring you the most satisfying, jaw-dropping tales of real-life karma and unsung heroes standing up to corrupt bullies. Do you think Officer Crow and Arthur Thorne got the sentences they deserved? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends to spread the inspiration, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of justice served.